Okay, thank you everyone for coming. Tonight we bring this gentleman, and I don't use that term loosely. He is the James Brown of Santa Barbara poetry, I think. Santa Barbara Poet Laureate 2009 through 2011. He's the founding director of the Creative Writing Program at Santa Barbara City College. He's a co-editor of the California Review of Books and a publisher and co-editor of Gunpowder Press. 35 years he's been writing, and he's published 11 books of poetry, somewhere thereabouts, 11 books, over 500 poems in literary journals across the country. I don't think I've ever read 500 books. So. He writes textbooks, fiction, creative nonfiction, has been published in the American Literary Review, and he's a playwright of produced plays. Please welcome David Starkey. Poor Ghosts. I read this in one day, and I'm a notoriously slow reader, but it's that fun of a read. And even though I lacked sleep that night, and I think I called in sick at work, I thought it was well worth it because it was fun to read the rockin' and rolling novel that you wrote. But don't listen to me. Listen to a couple customers here. Poor Ghosts is an examination of how we deal with loss and change, and a tribute to the best band that never was, set in the confusing time of COVID lockdown. I appreciate David Starkey's improvisations on rock history, but I'm most touched by his portrayal of the slow dance of grief. That's Glenn Phillips, the front man for Toad the Red Sprocket. I want to read one more customer note. I think it's a kind of a noteworthy one. From its riveting opening through the wonderfully imaginative unfolding of its narrative, Poor Ghost is a lively hopscotch of a novel, compelling, deep, and powerful. That customer's name is Tom, aka TC Boyle. Oh. So with that, we congratulate David to talk about his first, but definitely not his last novel. So please welcome David.
Well, it really touches my heart to see so many friends here. I feel really blessed. I am going to talk a little bit of some book talk, that was advertised, and I'm going to do a little book talk. And then Michael's got a couple questions for me, and then I'm going to read part of the first chapter, which is really short. So that's the lineup for this evening. And I know, having been where you all are, that once you start standing for a while, so I'm going to try and keep it in around 15 minutes. So if you get tired, you can sit on the floor, right?
Yeah. We do have some chairs.
So for the book talk part, I have published a lot of poetry and other books, but this is my first novel, and it's the fourth time I've given it a go trying to complete a novel. And I thought what I could do is pass on for some of my poet friends and just friends and people who are thinking of writing a novel in general, a few things that I picked up from the writing of this novel. So the first one is kind of obvious, but it's take what you can from your own life. Now this is a book about a bunch of rock stars, and I'm obviously not a rock star, but I've been listening to music for a long time, and even more important for this, I played in a lot of bands since I was 15, including with my friend Eric Prothero over there, in our band Falstaff Riley. He's got the t-shirt. And I felt like those experiences were really essential in creating these folks, And then I realized that every little petty moment, any bickering that you do in a band turned out to be good material. So that's one thing. The second thing is probably the most important. And for anyone who's ever been to my home, you'll know this. I said to have ready access to the setting of your novel, and I think that's kind of where I went awry on previous novels. So you may remember at the end of The Wizard of Oz, when Dorothy is back home in Kansas. She says, "If I ever go looking for my heart's desire again, I won't go looking any further than my own backyard."
Yeah.
So if you have read this novel, you know that most of it takes place in my backyard. So it was great because I kind of wrote the book in real time, the first draft, starting at the end of September of 2021. This was right after I had retired, and ending around January of the next year. And so whenever I wondered what are the sounds and smells, what are the flora and fauna in the backyard of my protagonist on any given day, I just had to open up the back door and find out. Now, the third piece of advice, or what I've learned, is kind of counterintuitive after what I've just said, but I did find that every opportunity I had to make my protagonist less like myself, the more he could become his own fictional person. So while I was drawing on my backyard and some previous experiences, that was really important. So while I'm happy to say that my own beautiful wife is alive and well with us here tonight, Caleb Crane's wife passes away before the novel even begins. And I have 4 children and 4 stepchildren. One of them is here. There he is. But my protagonist has only 1 daughter. I taught for many years at City College, as Michael said, but my protagonist is a retired insurance salesman, and so on. So every time I could slip the bonds of veracity, I think the book got better. And for instance, the crucial final scene in the novel involved a wildfire on New Year's Eve. That was kind of what the whole book was building up to. And you may recall, if you are a Santa Barbara resident, in the fall of 2021, it started raining cats and dogs every day, right? The grass was green, there was going to be no wildfires. But I realized I either had to change my novel or change reality, and so I decided to change reality. So the drought continues on throughout the novel. I think thinking of different ways to move the story forward was another thing that I really learned from this novel. So I have next door posts. The neighbors are complaining. Poor Ghost fan sites, text messages are an important part of the story. Press releases, letters to the editor, news story, and most notably an oral history of my invented band. And so I would just remind us all as writers, there are a lot of ways to communicate information in the 21st century, and it's great to take advantage of them. Another thing that I learned, and I think I sort of already knew this, was that assume your reader's patience is limited. So part of my reason for breaking my narrative up into different genres and for writing a bunch of short chapters was wanting my reader to keep feeling that if they didn't like what was happening on a certain page, something different would be happening a few pages later. And I do think that writing poetry for so many decades was a big help here, because we poets just assume we have to keep our readers engaged line by line and word by word. And I think that was a useful discipline for me. Another thing I learned was lean into the unexpected. So my inspiration for using oral history was a book called Please Kill Me, The Uncensored Oral History of Punk, which was originally published in 1996. And I have to admit that I had never heard of Taylor Jenkins Reid or Daisy Jones and the Six until I gave a copy of the book to my friend Chris Yost of the draft, and she said, well, there's a booklet that sort of has something like this going on. Not long after that, Donnie Walton published a book called The Final Revival of Opal and Neb, which some of you may have read, which was also a music-based story told as oral history. And then, of course, I learned that Daisy Jones was going to be an Amazon Prime miniseries. So it was like, well, what do I do? And I talked with the publisher, and we just decided to lean into the hoopla, So if you spend any time Googling my book, which I must admit I have done, you'll see a lot of references to Poor Ghost as a novel for fans of Daisy Jones and the Six, even though I didn't know anything about that book or about Taylor, but I do say thank you, Taylor Jenkins. And finally, I want to say, if possible, it's great to publish with someone who is as enthusiastic about your book as you are. That's pure luck, obviously, and all of us who have published know what a hit and miss experience that is, but I really am pleased with my middle-sized publisher, Nashville-based Turner Publishing. They have an imprint called Keylight Books, which is meant for books that might have potential to expand into other media. So that's where I am. And I'm really, really grateful for their publicity team, which has just responded to every idea I've had, usually on the same day. So that's been about as lucky as an author could be. Now, Michael, I know you had a question or two you wanted to follow up with me.
Actually, I think you answered them all.
Okay.
No, actually, I have one.
Yeah.
Poor Ghost is the name of the band. A tragedy, which you'll talk about, befalls them. They are so real that, you know, I want to look up Apple Music on Poor Ghost.
Yeah, yeah.
How were you able to do that?
Well, again, I think that was just playing a lot of music. As I mentioned in an interview with Leslie Dynaberg that was in The Independent, I stole from a lot of my own poems and songs because I knew I had the copyright to that material.
Yeah.
And so if you're reading the book and you're like, what the hell kind of a title is that for an album or a song, and what kind of weird lyric is that? It's just something that I wrote. It's probably a poem of mine. Yeah.
But, you know, it's just like, they were contemporaries of you too.
They are contemporaries.
They are contemporary, and
that helps.
You made it sound like I want to listen to them. You know,
Yeah.
screw you too. I want to listen to these people.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. And that's whom they're often compared to. And there's kind of a lesser you too.
yes. Why don't you read for us?
All right, I'm going to read a little bit then. And again, my chapters are short. I'm going to as you'll see here momentarily, the book begins with a plane crash. And I'm not going to read the description of the plane crash. It's kind of technical. I hope I did a decent job with it. And it's important for later on in the book, but I think for a setting like this, we can probably skip it. So here it goes. When the plane crashes in your backyard, you are sitting in the living room, flipping through the cartoons in the latest New Yorker. You live just a few miles from the Santa Barbara airport, so it's not unusual to hear low-flying planes. The sound of this one, though, is very different, much louder and getting closer fast. You drop the magazine and hurry to the plate glass window just as a small jet appears for a moment to your right. Then the next moment is slicing into your pine tree, slamming into the earth, and bursting into flames. A huge plume of black smoke rises from the bottom of your backyard. Strangely, the first thing that comes into your head is a lyric from an old Tom Petty song about an aeroplane falling on his block. Then a shiver runs up your spine, and your hands begin shaking so hard that you have to clasp them together to still them. Your daughter, Victoria, is visiting, and she begins screaming from the family room, "Jackson, oh my God, Jackson!" For the first time ever, you are glad that Victoria is childless. Jackson is her dog. "My God," you whisper, and you and Victoria are running outside. Your backyard is a trapezoid that's narrower toward the house and wider, about 40 yards wide, where the property ends. There's a thin strip of lawn running along the house, then a row of juniper and rosemary bushes. Then the yard dips on a deep slope for another 50 yards. Lemon trees grow by the fence line on either side, and until moments ago, a 50-foot-tall loblolly pine grew in the center of that patch of dirt and dry grass. The pine is now splintered about 5 feet from the ground, with the upper branches smashed flat beneath the plane, which looks smaller than when it appeared in your window. It's a passenger jet, or was. The two of you make your way down the hillside into a swirl of black and smoke. The jet looks as though some bad-tempered giant has torn a model airplane in half. and then torn it again for good measure. And I'll skip the further description of the plane and say, for a moment, you and Victoria stand there in awe. It is silent except for the flames feathering up from the front of the aircraft and crackling in the dry grass and pine duff and tree branches. It occurs to you that everyone on board must be dead. The smoke from the right engine thickens. The air smells of burning rubber and what you assume must be spilled fuel. You don't see Jackson. Then you hear a voice. A man about your age with a bloody face, his right arm dangling like a broken branch, is crawling out of the back half of the plane. My dog, Victoria screams. Have you seen my dog? He shakes his head and keeps crawling towards you. We'll find Jackson, okay, you tell her, but right now people are hurt. You run over and help the man to his feet, then place an arm around his back and direct him slowly away from the crash. The ground is pocked with gopher mounds, and he trips as you move up the hill. Ah, Jesus, God, he moans, that hurts like fucking hell. Sorry, you say, I'm just worried the plane might explode. You look down at his blood-smeared face and realize that he looks vaguely familiar. Is anyone else alive, you ask? He shrugs or seems to. I was asleep, he murmurs when it happened. Your next-door neighbor, Barton, calls your name from his backyard on the left, then awkwardly makes his way over the low fence between your properties. He stumbles down the hillside until he is beside you and the bloodied man, who is slumped to the ground. Are you okay? Barton asks. Where does it hurt? Are you a doctor? The man rasps. A dentist, Barton says. It hurts everywhere, the man mutters, then his eyes roll back into his head, and he is unconscious. You take your phone out of your pocket and dial 911, cursing yourself under your breath. You should have done that right away. You begin to tell the operator what is happening, but Victoria is screaming again. A man climbs from the front of the plane, his shirt on fire, his face burnt ashy black. He takes a few steps toward you, then falls to the dirt, motionless. There's a puff of smoke, and a tongue of flame shoots out of the right engine, which causes the wing suspended in the branches to flip and fall to the ground. What's left of the pine tree begins to burn in earnest. In the distance, you hear the wail of a siren, then another and another. He needs help, you say stupidly into your phone, looking at Barton and pointing at the man. The plane's on fire, Barton says. Well, Jesus, yes, you say, frustrated and frightened and buzzing with a weird energy. You end the call and shove your phone in your pocket and gently lay the man you've been cradling on the ground. As you edge toward the forward fuselage, intense heat sears your face and hands and arms. Then a soft breeze shifts the fire in the other direction, and you pull off your shirt, rush in, and do your best to smother the flames flickering up from the prone man's clothing. Though his shirt is still smoking and his skin is hot to the touch, you grab him under his arms and pull him uphill, away from the fire. He is unmoving, possibly dead, but you roll your shirt into something like a pillow and place it under his head. From the corner of your eye, you see Barton creeping in your direction, as though this man is a monster who might suddenly spring up and grab him. Barton reaches down and gingerly pushes a finger against the crispy flesh. He shakes his head like someone in a movie or on a TV show. And you have a strange feeling that what is happening is something that might indeed be recreated by the entertainment industry. The man's face is unrecognizable, so you don't know at the time that this is Stuart Fisher, the lead singer and main songwriter for the band Poor Ghost. If you're honest, he looks like a charred piece of meat. Thank you.
you want to take some audience questions?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm interested in how you chose to write the book. I don't know if the whole book is way in the second person.
Yeah, so the book is in the second person first, present tense, yeah, which puts a lot of people off. I mean, in some of the Goodreads reviews I've been reading of my book, that's something that throws folks off. But there is a really good large picture reason for doing that, yeah. And so I can't answer that question without giving away the ending. We'll talk about it after.
Okay.
Anything else?
I'm so interested in the process of that first scene. How far into writing this book did you know that was going to be the first scene?
Immediately, yeah,
So-
immediately. I
and that
knew
never
was-
changed.
That just seems like a really good scene. I did spend the part of that I left out trying to picture what a plane would look like as it kind of fell apart, and I drew little pictures, and and then I think I made a model out of like paper and stuff like that, and drew the door here, and just I wanted to make sure that even though it's kind of confusing because the plane's all over the place, that it did make sense, and also that it made sense for the reveal at the end of the book.
Did you know your ending? Your beginning and your ending, and then you wrote from
I
there?
think I knew the ending by the time I finished writing the section about the fire, the crash, which is just the first handful of chapters,
Right.
which was helpful. And at that point I changed the POV. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I really yes. One more question. Yes.
Yes.
You can ask about one more.
So I wanted to know if you knew for sure that was the best opening, or were there others as you were writing that you thought, well, you know what, this might be a better opening? Were you always convinced that the...
So, I mentioned that article or the interview with Leslie. I have a kayak, and I'll go out there in what I think of as Goleta Bay. It's not called that, but where the planes take off from. And I had this feeling, just sitting out there, sometimes for me I'm just drinking a beer or two. I thought, what would happen if a plane crashed? And I imagined myself heroically rowing over and saving everybody. Well, it's, you're out there, there's nothing else to do but to think of stuff. And then I can sort of see where my house is from there. And I thought, well, what if a plane crashed there? And then I thought, well, who would be on that plane? And then I thought, well, what if it was a plane containing a rock band? Because I've been wanting to write about music for a long time. And then I just knew how can you beat the opening of a plane crashing in someone's backyard? Yeah. But that's a good question. Thank you. Okay, well, I'm happy to follow whatever Michael's
Let's sign some books.
sign some books. Yes.
All right. Thank you again, everyone.